I have pretty bad memory, and I only remember one integrated strategies run I've ever done. It was my very first time playing IS3. The very first level I got was the one that rushes you with fish and lizards, and I lost immediately. Whenever I start a new IS, I'm always hoping that happens again. I'm not sure why, maybe I'm a masochist. But my first run of IS6 trolled me in a different way. Aside from the supporter and medic voucher from my initial squad selection, I only got Vanguard, Guard, and Defender vouchers, plus a single supporter voucher, until just at the very end on floor 5. But when I got to the boss and beat him with such a cursed squad, despite not knowing any of the boss mechanics, I was a little disappointed. At first, I thought my disappointment was because it felt too easy. I tried to rationalize it as being due to other factors. For example, this was my first time using Trigodia's S2, and man, that cat really simplifies a lot of things. And of course, there's also the fact that this was on the easiest difficulty. But once I finished Ending 2, I realized there's a different issue at play here. I also found Ending 2 fairly easy. Definitely not as easy as Ending 1, but still beatable despite going into the boss fight blind. The issue was that I was conflating something being difficult with something being interesting. Ending 2 showed that it's possible to do the latter without the former, but in the case of Ending 1, it is unfortunately both. As best as I can recall, this is the first IS boss where you can just put a blocker in front of them and put a medic on the blocker, and call it a day. The first two bosses of IS2 and IS4 are either 3x3 bosses, or have a mechanic to dash past your blockers. In IS3, the first boss gains low altitude hovering, and corrodes nearby operators, while the second boss becomes unblockable in Phase 2. And in IS5, Boss 1 forces your operators to redeploy at the start of Phase 2, and in Ending 2, you're incentivized to get Theresis as far away from Teresa as possible. So when I put a blocker down in front of this boss, I was expecting the boss to use some ability that would let them pass through. And when that didn't happen, I spent the rest of the fight waiting for the inevitable BS boss mechanic that would disrupt my setup. But in the end, the boss just sat there and died. Literally, the only thing that caught me off guard was that he didn't walk down the center of the 3-tile wide lane in the middle, or zigzag back and forth along it. I had already positioned my healer, expecting to put Elpianus in the center lane, and I had to wrangle the boss left with Trigodia's cat. The only even moderately interesting mechanic I found was the flying Smarties the boss spawns. When I first played this stage, I assumed the boss just spawned 3 or 5 rows of Smarties, centered on the middle row of the map. But after reviewing the footage, I think they actually spawn based on the boss's position. I just happened to block him on the center tile. This means that choosing where you block the boss is an interesting decision, though I'd still only classify it as a mildly interesting decision, since the answer will usually be as close to the red box as possible. In contrast to this, Ending 2 manages to introduce an interesting boss mechanic without greatly bumping up the difficulty. It forces you to actually consider your operator placements in a new way, but not in a way that severely restricts operator choices. Of particular note, operators defeated by the boss seem to get a reduced redeployment timer, which I presume was to avoid pigeonholing people into recruiting lots of fast redeploy and summoner operators. The boss's insta-kill ability, the reduced redeployment timers, the multiple lanes, and the small map size all combine into a very dynamic and chaotic fight. It's exactly the sort of BS mechanic I expect from an IS boss. And despite feeling easier than most of the other Ending 2 bosses, I think this one is my favorite. If I had to defend the Ending 1 boss, I suppose I can appreciate that it's probably less frustrating for newer players who don't have well-developed rosters. There's also something to be said about not jump scaring people with weird mechanics in the middle of a boss fight, in a mode where you lose all your progress when you fail. I think a large part of the reason why I enjoyed Ending 2 so much is because the main mechanic of the fight got introduced long before the final boss fight actually happened. It gave time for me to figure out the targeting mechanic and start thinking of the counter strategy before doing the real thing. This probably also contributed to making the boss feel easy. In reality, it's probably about the same as your usual IS boss. I just didn't need to fight the boss to learn the mechanic, die, and then do another run so I could try to use what I'd learned. It's a big contrast to, for example, the first ending of IS5, or the second ending of IS2, which, if you don't know the mechanic in advance, means a pretty near guaranteed loss. Alright, that's enough rambling. In conclusion, Ending 1 is still a bit disappointing. In the grand scheme of things, it's probably a step in the right direction for the game mode, but I still wish there was something more to the boss.